We're going to get started in just a minute, so grab your pizza and have a seat. There's a couple seats up front here for anybody who, although it looks like you guys are comfortable back there on the couches. Awesome. Okay. So, welcome. We have a good agenda tonight, but I'd first like to extend a thank you to Aerospike for hosting, for giving us pizza, wine, beer. Thank you, Lauren, for setting up AV, Caitlin for doing all this, Patrick for check-in. Really appreciate the time everybody puts into having a venue ready for us. So can we please give our hosts a hand? I'd also like to introduce you to Young Pak, who is the technical marketing director here, and he's just going to give you a little overview of what Aerospike does.
Thank you very much. So I get a couple of questions for the data scientists here. How many of you are actively using a MapReduce type functionality in day-to-day today? So some percentage. How many of you are still using things like SAS and more traditional tools? Actually, not as many as I thought. Okay. So I was just very curious about that because Aerospike, what we do is we have a very real-time operational database. We've been known for quite a while now in terms of low latency, high throughput in a distributed database. And one of the major things that we've come across over the past year is a new use case in dealing with live data. So if you want to do live analytics on a large amount of data in the terabytes, and you want to do that in seconds, that's kind of the thing that we like to do. So with Aerospike, one of the things we like to see is people that come from different aspects of data. And so we wanted to welcome the Palo Alto Data Science Association here. So if you see any of us in the Aerospike shirts, please feel free to talk to us. We're just very curious about what people are doing with data today. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so a couple of housekeeping items. We are up to over 800 members now. I don't know how we got there. You guys must be doing word of mouth. I'm not doing any marketing for it. So the word is getting out there, membership is growing, and thank you guys for whoever's spreading the word. Really appreciate that. Over the last 6 months, I've worked on building this organization and bringing you good content, and I am actually handing the leadership role over starting July. And one of our speakers tonight is actually going to be taking this over. I'd like to introduce to stand up Bob Boyd, who is principal at Haddon Hill Group. He has a team to help take over, so you are in excellent hands. And you will not be disappointed. Thank you, Bob. And I'll give a little more background on you when we go over speakers. So 2 topics tonight, and we also have, which I'll go over in a sec, but we also have 5 passes. All my efforts of getting sponsors is paying off. We got 5 passes tonight, so I'm going to raffle off 3 right when we get started here, and then 2 at the end, and I'll go over what those conferences are in just a sec. So our first topic tonight, Phil Yelland from Google is going to go over 2 case studies, and he's going to talk about 2 different analysis systems that they've recently implemented at Google. So this ought to be a really nice where the rubber meets the road perspective on what a leading company is doing right now. Phil is brilliant. Sorry, I'm going to brag about you, Phil. He has a PhD in computer science from the University of Cambridge. And if that wasn't enough, he got his MBA at Berkeley. So it's a pretty nice broad background. And he's been at Google, I think, just over 4 years. Okay, great. So you'll be hearing from Phil first up tonight. And then we'll be hearing from Bob from Haddon Hill Group. Him and his team will be taking over the management of this. I'll still be finding sponsors for event raffles, so you can still come and have a chance to win. He's going to go over a comparison between star schema and the massively parallel shared nothing data warehouses, and he has 25 years experience in this, so he's got a lot of perspective to bring to the table. He also has his MBA at Berkeley, so we have a lot of Berkeley in the house tonight. And he has a computer science and economics degree from UMass Amherst. So also broad background, so fantastic. I'll let you share a little bit more about your background and introduce yourself to the group. Okay, we have 3 conferences coming up in June that we're raffling off. So I'm just going to go over what the conferences are about very quickly. I'm going to raffle off 3 of these and then get started. Okay? First off, the MMDS Foundation, Modern Massive Data Sets Foundation, is holding their workshop in June. That's at Berkeley. They've donated 3 passes, so I'm going to start tonight raffling off all 3 of those. And if Patrick could bring me the famous champagne bucket, that will be the names, and I'll have some lucky person be the unbiased third party in just a second. Thank you, Patrick. And then GigaOwn is doing a structures conference in June. This is more IT infrastructure, how we're building architectures to hold today's big data challenges. So this is a very specific show. There's a link on the website, there's more information about it, but they've also donated a pass to raffle, and I think that theirs is a full conference pass valued at I think $12.95 or $16.95 or something like that. So it should be some really good networking going on there for those who are in the infrastructure space. And then the Internet of Things world, this is one that I wouldn't want to miss just because it's a gadget show, right? It's going to be toys all over the place. Really great speakers here. You see Adidas, everything from Adidas to Oracle. So this will be all over the map, but the Internet of Things is going to be feeding the big data analytics machine like we can't imagine today. So there ought to be some interesting thought discussions going on there. Okay, so I am going to raffle off 3 passes to MMDS. And by the way, if anyone can't use the passes, go ahead and post it on the forum or email me, because you can always find a member who wants to go and who can get the time off work or who's in town. So make sure these passes get used by membership, and if you can't use them, find someone who can. All right, let's see. Emad, you've volunteered to help before. Why don't you go ahead and pick the first name?
My own name.
And yeah, that's
Candy.
Candy Nachimitu.
All right.
Candy Nachimitu. Thank you very much. I think I'm gonna cycle back with you after, so I make sure I get all this right. I usually have an envelope, but I don't tonight. But I'll email you all the information, and I want to see you after, because I want to make sure I got your email right, or else I'll have a hard time finding you.
Thank you.
Okay. Congratulations, Candy. And let's see, Sash, welcome. Is this your first time?
Yes.
Ah, welcome. Shiv Patil. Shiv? Oh, Shiv, congratulations. And NetAppInc.com. I wish I had an envelope for you, but I don't. I didn't have time to do those today. But I can read your email address fine, so I will send that to you in email. And last but not least, let's see, Dave, are you new?
Yes, I am.
Welcome. Seagate. This is Pritika Kulshritna. Wow, that's an awesome name. Congratulations. Envelope, and I might circle back with you on that one too. Okay, well, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Phil and let him take it away. And so warm welcome for Phil Yelland.
Thank you, Sally. Welcome all. This is advancing itself automatically here, so I may have to see if I can keep that. Sandra asked me if I could present some of the work that we're doing at Google, and what I'll do is give you 2 case studies. Actually, I promised 2 rather recklessly. It's about 1.5. We're in 45 minutes. We're not going to get through 2. Sandra hinted that we might want a sort of interactive exchange. So if you need to interrupt me, or if you'd like to interrupt me and ask a question, do go ahead. Obviously, if I need to curtail the presentation, we can take the discussion offline or something. But if you want to stop me at any point, then feel free. So without further ado, 2 case studies. I'll run through who I am. You know who Google is, but we'll try and work out how the two coincide. The first study I'm doing concerns essentially pitch identification for a sales force. So Google has a very large direct sales force. This is intended to support them by looking through customer data and looking for opportunities where there's a pitch in the offering. The second one, very, very different, looking at traffic streams, looking at query streams that come into the Google properties, trying to work out if there are anomalies in those traffic streams that may hint at a breakage in the software, at a hardware issue, or some other occurrence. So as I say, you know who Google is. It's very big. It does an awful lot of things. It also has, as I was pointing out earlier, an awful lot of servers. So there's about 1 million servers out there that Google has. So I get to indulge myself. I have 1 million toys. So a lot of this stuff is running on tens, if not thousands of servers. In fact, both of these are running on the order of about 5,000 servers. So this is the context within which I'm working. So we have an awful lot of computing infrastructure. We have an awful lot of different activities. So it's a really nice nexus within which to work. That being said, so you've got me. I'm a sample of one. Google has an enormous number of different activities, so I'm going to give you a perspective on a particular aspect of Google. It's two particular slices, but they're very particular slices. So I would hesitate to suggest that this was representative of every activity in Google. It may give you hints as to what's possible, the ways in which you can attack the sort of problems that arise and with the capabilities that Google has. But I'm sure if you went, for example, to people at YouTube, they'd have a very different perspective to present. So I'm still recovering from Sandra's introduction. I'll try and suppress my blushes. So essentially, I'm a programmer, but I've done work in statistics. I went off and got an MBA for the fun of it. I've done essentially. I'm a misled mathematician, and most of my life I spent trying to get paid for doing maths. Within Google, I've worked within the advertising area. So these are the people who run quality analysis on the AdWords product. I've worked with search. This is the other side of the house, and believe me, there are 2 sides of the house. They actually quite sedulously separate them. So these are the people who run the search engines and look at the way in which traffic is moved through search engines. And now, as I say, I'm working with the sales force. I work with a small group that supports the direct sales force. And as I say, Google has a large direct sales force, about 10 to 15,000 people, depending on how you count them. So it's a lot of people to support. So just to zoom in more detail, GTEC, we're the internal engineering group for the Salesforce. Google, for better or for worse, sells an awful lot of its own tools. There's a tremendous not invented here aspect to a lot of Google's activity. It does an awful lot of its CRM itself. A lot of the tools that they use are sourced internally. Many of them very, very good. There are a lot of very brilliant people obviously working at Google, but they all need supporting and they all need enhancing and so on and so on. So they actually have an internal sales-specific engineering team. Now these are not sales engineers, these are people who are supporting the infrastructure that supports the sales force. Salesforce customers, so the people that Google's Salesforce are talking to, obviously you and me, publishers, people like the New York Times, but particularly in this case advertisers. So you're all aware of how advertising works on Google. I'll run through very quickly. But what the case study I'm presenting is dealing with the interactions of the direct sales force with the advertising clients of Google. So before that is for the second case study. As I said, I worked within the search world at Google. I worked in a small group, 50 people, who look at essentially the quality analysis for the search products. So there's a bunch of data analysts, software engineers who actually put together infrastructure that will allow people to look at the web logs to see how a search is being done, to try and understand how users are interacting with the search properties. Google also have a very, very extensive A/B testing framework, enormous A/B testing framework. At any one point, I think there's about 1,000 separate experiments going on the search engines. So all of that needs to be looked at. That's just in the search side. In the advertising side of the house, as I say, they're a different set. All of that needs to be monitored and interpreted and analysed, and that's what this group does as well. So coming back to the first. The first case study, as I say, the interaction between the direct sales force and the advertising customers. I'm sure most of you know how search and advertising works, but just for the sake of synchrony. Essentially, you type a search word into the Google search engine, that's parsed and analysed and goes through vast numbers of taxonomic analyses and all sorts of funny things. But essentially, it comes up with a set of keywords that characterise what you're searching for. The idea is to try and understand the intent of your search so that we can serve ads that correlate with that intention. Advertisers place bids on keywords so that when a user comes with a particular search intention, that advert can be served. I suggest, for example, if you ever type mesothelioma, I don't know if you've ever tried that, but if you do that, you get enormous numbers of ads, an absolute explosion of ads. Turns out mesothelioma is very rare unless you've dealt with asbestos. And if you've dealt with asbestos, there are dollar signs everywhere. Essentially, every litigating lawyer in the country knows about asbestos lawsuits, and so you'll get enormous numbers. It's a very specific intention. You usually search for this if you're involved somehow with asbestos, and so you've got a very specific intent. And based on that, you can start serving ads. So that's essentially what's happening.
Question. One thing that I've done recently with Google is I've started asking it questions, like how much does a plumber cost in Palo Alto, or why does Barack Obama not like the Russians, or something like that. Is it possible for people to place bids on questions?
Yes, as I say, there's a huge amount of behind the search engine. Your query is not necessarily the keywords that are turning up at the advertiser. So your query is actually being fed through a bunch. They have things like, they have what they now call the knowledge graph, which is essentially a big frame-based system. Your query is parsed and then it's shoved into this frame-based system, which essentially sparks up a lot of associations. And those associations are characterized by keywords, and those keywords get served to the advertiser. So there's a lot of, we're talking a cast of thousands of people who are working on these things, and a lot of them very, very high powered. So there is a lot of work goes on in actually trying to understand the intent of a search. And so yes, it will actually, if the infrastructure is working correctly, it should divine what it is that you're looking for and serve those up in the form of keywords, which are not necessarily the ones that occurred in your query, but are associated with the meaning of it. And there's if you look at the AdWords front end, there's lots of different variations on the way in which you can bid on a keyword. You can talk about narrow intent or broad intent. Essentially, how close to the original query that keyword is. So you can get keywords that actually occurred and say, I only want to bid on the ones that actually occurred in the keyword. Or you can say, no, do your stuff, try and work out what's going on, and I'll bid on the keywords that are associated. So yeah, that is certainly possible.
Does the user need to click on one of those ads in order for the Google to make money?
That depends on the nature of the advertising contract. In most instances, for the vast majority of the advertisers, yes. but there are advertisers that do what's called CPM advertising, where they're essentially paying for an ad display. If you use the Google Display Network, which is, if you're a publisher who provides a website that Google provides adverts to, then you're usually dealing with CPM advertising, where they're essentially paying for a spot on the screen. But certainly for the search advertising, most of the search advertising is done on a click-through basis. So yeah.
So what percentage of the time users are clicking?
That depends a lot on the keyword. It depends an awful lot on the keyword, but it's in the low percentages. It's not huge. But you get 4.5 billion, 5 billion queries a day. You don't have to multiply that by very much, and there's a fair old torrent of money comes in. So yeah, it's low, but it's high enough that it makes a significant amount of money. So as I say, it's like $58 billion a year. It seems odd, but it makes an awful lot of money.
Advertising works.
So two parameters as an advertiser, if you come to Google, there's two things that you set. One is the bid. You say, I've got this keyword, I'm going to pay this much for a click on that keyword. Essentially, if my ad displays next to that keyword, on the basis of that keyword occurring in a query, I'll pay that much for a click. Oh, sorry, I'll pay that much for a position. Sorry, my apologies. I'll pay that much to appear on the page. And if you're clicked on, then you'll pay your bid. The other thing you can do is say, I'm not going to spend more than a certain amount a day. So I don't know if anyone's used AdWords, but many people will set a ceiling saying, I don't care how many clicks I get, I'm not going to spend more than $10 a day, $15 a day, and so on and so forth. The importance of the second parameter is that once you hit that budget, you're not going to get any adverts, regardless of whether you qualify based on your bid. You could be bidding and you can essentially qualify for an advert, but if you spend all of your budget that day, you're going to be limited. You're essentially not going to appear. So that's termed budget capping, and happens quite a lot. So this particular case is dealing with budget capping, but it's also dealing with a very particular type of customer, a very particular type of advertiser. Google has, I think it's about 40 million advertisers, an awful lot of people. But strangely enough, well, not strangely enough, as you would imagine, it's a funny power law. There are very, very large advertisers, Procter & Gamble, Toyota. These are very, very big spenders, and they essentially they come in for the foot massage type treatment. They're essentially the sales force will be focused on these people. Will give them a very high level of support. Essentially, you're doing a lot of what an advertising agency will do. Sometimes you're working with external advertising agents, but you're doing a lot of campaign coordination and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of backwards and forth, a lot of interaction there. So these tier one advertisers, very, very important to the business. It's very important to maintain them, in a state of happiness and to make sure that they're getting what they want. So we have this budget capping. A lot of these big advertisers, even the very big tier one advertisers, will run tens, if not hundreds of campaigns. They're not necessarily focused on all of those campaigns. The idea for this particular piece of software, the one that I'm describing, was to try and identify campaigns in those large accounts that were running into this budget capping problem. And the question was, can you find campaigns that are clearly budget capped and they're not intentionally budget capped? If you can do that, then essentially you go back to the customer and say, if you want to raise your budget level, we make more money obviously, but you get more adverts. And we have a good basis for believing that you actually want more adverts, that you're not running into this budget cap deliberately. I'll come back to that in a minute. But essentially that was the basis on which you can go to the sales force and say, now go back to your tier one account, have this conversation and see if they want to raise their bid. Now the challenge here is that a lot of accounts, even for the very big accounts, a lot of the campaigns are deliberately budget limited. A lot of people are quite fine running into budget limits, regardless of how the bidding works. They actually say, I've got this amount of money for this campaign, I'm not going to spend any more. I'm running a brand campaign, I don't care whether I hit every single keyword, I just want to make sure enough people are seeing my brand. In that case, going to them from the sales force and saying, we want you to increase your budget is it's like teaching a pig to whistle. It's useless and it makes the pig cross. It's not a productive exercise. So you cannot go to the sales force and say, increase this, see about increasing the budget on this particular campaign. So bad pitches hurt when you're dealing with the sales force. Can you find enough opportunities? Can you essentially understand the intention of the account, of the people running the account well enough that you can identify that small set of opportunities that are running into budget caps without running into too many of these false positives that could cause a lot of grief? Other problem, there's a lot of data. So one of the pictures here is big data. So we're talking at the minimum about 20,000 accounts, 20,000 campaigns, sorry. 20,000 campaigns, around about 2 years history. You've got daily histories of that. You've got other, it's a lot of data. It starts to pile up. The data quality, well, as you all know, I'm sure you're all out there in the trenches. Certainly for a lot of web software, the logging is not a great priority. The advertising, the ad mixers, the advertising infrastructure, Google wants to sell ads. It does not necessarily want to record how it went about selling ads. The priority is to get those ads served. It means there's a lot of missing data, a lot of noisy data. It's very good in as far, as these things go, but nonetheless, you're dealing with something that's working on sub-second time basis. It's working in a very constrained environment. So you're going to get data issues. Also with the sales force, they want to know why they're talking to the customer. You cannot say this black box, spit out a check mark and say go and call your customer. You have to provide them with some background and some justification that they can present to the customer to say this is why we believe that you actually want to increase your budget. So we must provide them with some collateral. And last but not least, the system has to work out of the box. You cannot do the traditional machine learning thing, which is to try a bunch of stuff and see which bits work. If you try shoving pictures through the sales force, they get really cross with you. So you cannot go out there and say, well, we've got 10,000 random pictures, please go and make them and see which ones work. You've got to provide quality pictures from the outset, so it's got to be well calibrated. So what we did, and as I was saying to some of the members earlier on, this is in trial stage, so it's not necessarily the case that we've solved everything here, but the way we've attacked this, we have a two-stage system. We have a system which does time series analysis, takes each of those campaigns. We have daily spend data, we have data about which campaigns qualified for which ads they might have got if they hadn't had their budget limits. Look at those time series. There's like 4 or 5 different time series associated with each campaign. Estimate or characterize what happened historically in the account and look at what might happen in the future. One of the things you want to do, for example, is say an account that didn't used to lose impressions, but will do soon. There you've got a basis for saying, well, historically, I mean, your practice in the past has been always to keep ahead of your possible impressions to make sure that you always qualify based on your budget. But look at what's going to happen in the next month or so. There's trends that are at work in the marketplace or in the user community. You're going to increase your exposure to advertising, but you've still got the same budget. That's a point at which you can go to the customer and say, look, we think this is going to happen. The second thing is that even on the basis, or even given the time series data that you have, the signals that you extract from the time series, there's a bunch of other attributes of the account which need to be taken into account before you can accurately characterize what's actually going on. So an account with the same history of spending and advertising qualification and so on that's running on YouTube may be very, very different in its intentions from one that's running on the Google search engine. YouTube is a very, very different context. You don't focus on search necessarily when you're doing YouTube. You do a lot of clicking and browsing and so on. Two accounts that look the same from the point of view of a time series analysis maybe doing very, very different things on different properties. And there are other attributes of the accounts that you'll need to look at to try and distinguish different types of intention based simply, given a particular time series analysis. A lot of that is actually, at the moment, it's embodied in the heads of the salespeople, the account managers, and so on and so forth. A lot of times you'd go to them with a time series and say, look, this looks interesting. And they'll say, yeah, but it's this sort of an account. This sort of account wants to do this sort of thing, and we can tell that he's or she's doing this. This is probably not a good pitch. Or you go to them with an identical time series and say, yeah, there's a reasonable, there's a plausible case to be made there because we have this sort of an account. This account's doing that. There are a lot of these heuristic rules that they're using. This is something we wanted to build into the system from the outset, because remember, it has to work out of the box. We embodied this in a Bayesian belief network. I don't know if it's very old school. I go back 20 years with this work, with Bayesian belief networks, but they achieved their moment in the sun in the 90s, where they were used a lot in AI systems to capture heuristic rules, and this is what we're doing here.
So you just mentioned that if you detect that the client might have some upbeat strength, and then you can encourage the client to put more money and increase the cap. So what if you detect that their campaign is not really functional? Will you tell them, hey, stop wasting money?
Oh no, they won't spend. The cap is you make a good point that they may be able to reallocate their budget to a different campaign in the same account, but we haven't looked at that. That's certainly a possibility. But in and of itself, having a budget limit that's too high and is not being fully utilized is innocuous to the client. They won't ever be charged that very high budget. And in fact, some people set a ridiculously high budget level, and they adjust their bids to make sure that they don't exceed a certain level of expenditure. But certainly, yes, if we've got, it's also complicated because some campaigns may be coming out of the same budget. There's a lot of these irregularities in any real world system. But yes, there may be opportunities for reallocation of budgets. It's not something we've looked at because it's difficult to sell to the sales. Sales really like selling budget increases because they get commission. But there may also be a possibility that we can go to the salespeople and say, you can get brownie points from your customer by telling him to do reallocation, and won't they think this is a wonderful thing? That's certainly a possibility. It's not something we've looked at up to now. But in and of itself, a high budget is not going to hurt you, provided you're not selling up to that level. But certainly, yeah, a good point. So, Bayesian belief network embodies these heuristic rules, gives you good out-of-the-box performance. There is also machine learning that you can do to adjust the parameters on a Bayesian belief network. I'll come to that very briefly, but you can take feedback as well. So how does this work? I'll run through this very, very quickly. This is very schematic, but essentially there's two parts to this. We take auction logs. So as I said, how many data centers Google runs? 20, 40, 50. There's thousands of machines running these continuous advertising auctions. They're spitting out the logs. The logs are distilled, subject to time series analysis. So we have a complicated time series model that runs over all of these things. That's then dumped into the Bayesian belief network. So that's happening for each of these 20-odd thousand accounts. The Bayesian belief network comes up with a number, says this is a number we think is a rating of how promising this particular campaign is at this particular time for this particular pitch. That's dropped into essentially what amounts to a NoSQL database. Later on, the account manager can come to that and query it through a web-based front end. So that's the way in which it's set up. I won't go through this in any detail, but there's a bunch of Greek, and essentially this is if you're familiar with it, it's a time series structural model. It does a dynamic regression. There's a conditional heteroscedasticity, which is always fun to say. It's essentially a complicated model. The nice thing about having all of that machine infrastructure there is you can run these complicated models now. This is not something we could do until fairly recently, but now you can take 25,000 accounts and run them through I think it goes on, yeah, 2 pages. Run it right through a complicated, this is a Bayesian time series analysis, and it runs through what's called a markup chain Monte Carlo simulator. You can run some fairly intensive stuff and get these things out. The output of this is very, very simple. The output is essentially a characterization, it's a very simple characterization of the way in which the account is working. But it has to do with a lot of noise, non-stationarity, there's a lot of mess in that data that it needs to get rid of in order to come up with an accurate summary. So this is what it actually looks like on the output. We smooth off a lot of these things. You see the LMH. We're actually giving a 3-letter code. It tells you, essentially characterizes the way in which this campaign has been running historically, and the way in which it's projected to run in the near future. This LMH is essentially done as a difference between 2 sets of random processes. And as I say, it's a complicated calculation that produces it, but what it produces is essentially a very, very simple signal. But it's a very descriptive signal. It actually makes a lot of difference in the basic value. So back to the Bayesian belief network. If you want more selling on the Bayesian belief network, essentially those heuristic rules, we can calibrate them. They're soft rules, they're probabilities, they're not yes or no. A lot of the proceedings, the systems preceding these, or ones that are used outside of the Salesforce, they're essentially yes or no rules. If this is happening, then this will set this billion to 1, there we go, to true. That's not necessarily sufficient nuance to capture everything that's going on with these heuristic rules. A lot of the heuristic rules are only, you're still uncertain about your conclusions. You can do that you can capture that very nicely in a Bayesian belief network. What it gives you at the end is not a yes or no. What it gives you at the end is a rating. It says, we're 80% sure this thing should be pitched. What that allows the Salesforce to do is to take their 100 accounts that they're responsible for and to order them in order of the probability, the confidence, or the score that you're giving them that the pitch is likely. And provided they're above a certain threshold, they can then work down that list in order and make sure that and be reasonably assured that they're allocating their time in a useful manner. And that's a lot easier than saying, 100 accounts which are glowing red and 100 accounts that are glowing green. Take your pick and see what's happening. I won't go through this in great detail because I want to run pretty fast. But essentially, there is a formal basis for Bayesian belief. Sorry, go ahead.
For the time series analysis, how much look back period and look ahead period look like the past 30 days, past, because that affects a lot the campaign, right?
It does, yeah. I think at the moment we're running on. I'd have to tell it. It's about a month out, I think, and I think it goes about 3 months back.
It includes all kinds of campaigns like retargeting and all kinds. Diversified by. No,
it certainly doesn't. There's a bunch of filtering that goes on ahead of time. Some of those accounts, it's very difficult to work out because there's a lot of noise and not everybody fills in all the fields. So you get brand campaigns that are not flagged as brand. There's other remarketing where remarketing is buried in some account description. So some of them sneak through, but certainly not all of them are done in the same way. There's other distinctions. There's flighted campaigns. I'm sure if you've done some, people who are essentially turning their campaign on and off. And again, you don't always get a clear signal. So a lot of this is actually going into the time series model. It has to work out what's happening and fill in periods where the campaign was turned off. But you're right, there is some amount of sensitivity to the time, and this is the system as it stands at the moment. What we'd like to do, and what we have done, is get more complicated signals out of the time series analysis. So we're getting, one of the things I've been looking at very recently is what's known as soft evidence. Rather than just giving you a nice token, you get another set of probabilities, and the probabilities go into the Bayesian network. But yes, you're right. At some point, you have to make a categorical decision about what you're going to look at. But that's true.
Last question, do you consider the features of the rule? Like, what features are part of the rule for targeting users? What's the correlation? Do you guys use the correlation?
We look at some of the. We are not looking at the moment at the AdWords keywords. We certainly should do, and there's a bunch of taxonomic verticals based on it. The problem with the keywords is it's a huge space, so you get very, very sparse signal. But the system does a bunch of it does a bunch of essentially categorization of keywords. And so we're looking at the moment, we've just started getting these signals in, the categories of keywords and how they're changing. Well, that's certainly true, you know, that's one of, so there's a bunch of, as I say, other covariates that go into the Bayesian network. We're trying to get more of them. But unfortunately, every time we do that, we have to go back to the account manager and say, and now how does this particular signal work? Because out of the box, it's not clear to us how this interacts with the other things that they're looking at. So that has to be recalibrated, and that's where the work comes in. I'll come to that later on, but yeah, it's a challenge.
So if the pitch is made based on a recommendation you made, and it is successful, and the budget is increased, do you have any mechanism to do that?
Yes, we do. Yeah,
exactly. You're totally wrong.
Yeah, we have some. We have a mechanism for getting that back in now. As I say, we're only in trials, so we're starting to get that data back. But in principle, we can then feed that back into the Bayesian network and readjust those weights, readjust the priors that we have on the. And we have provision to do that. What we don't have is sufficient data at the moment to actually do that. But we're starting to get that back in.
Sorry. Specify the network structure or the
Yeah, the network structure is specified, so it's not. There's no learning of the structure. There is some amount of learning of the network, the conditional probabilities. So those are done with essentially Dirichlet prior, but we do some amount of readjustment. But the structure itself, we found that was pretty easy to get. I'll show you. It's not very big at all. It's very, very small.
Do you guys have schema keys in academic journals?
We're writing as we speak. Our scientists are hard at work. But yeah, in my spare time, I tend to listen like this. Yeah, it's as I say, a lot of it is just keeping this stuff running, which is taking a lot of my time. But yeah, it's so that's an technique. I won't go into the great detail, but it's very small. And the thing is, it has to be understandable to our users. So they have to be able to. One of the things that I'll come to in a minute, when you go to a customer with a pitch, a lot of the internal nodes in the network are actually explanations. So one of these things says, actively managed budget, this thing here, which you can't read, unfortunately. That's an internal node, that's a latent variable that tries to characterize how much the user, the advertiser in this case, is engaged with budget setting on that account. And there's a bunch of signals that come in at the bottom end and they feed up through the Bayesian network into that latent node. And you can then go to the salesperson and say, well, you know, based upon these signals, we don't think this customer's been looking at the budget in recently. And so that actually provides part of the collateral, part of the pitch that the direct salesperson can then go to the customer with. So yeah, sports, believe me, it's hard work getting this. You have to do a lot of interviewing, and not everybody agrees with that.
So how granular is for the time scale has to be, like in day, in hours?
It's in days. It's in days, not in hours, but it's in days.
And it seems that your model is quite similar to the internal financial, the value at risk model, like they fall below the budget and then...
Some of it, so there is some of that. There's essentially you're looking at a probability mass above and below a line. Yeah, there's certainly that. So we're looking at simulation and we're counting the accuracy above and below a line. That's probably not the best thing we could do, but it certainly worked as a first cut. I'll come to the anomaly detector, and that's much more like the Deval model. So essentially, Bayesian learning there. I'm going quite. How much have I got?
He has 15 more.
15, right. Well, we'll tell you. At the pace. All right. What is it? I'll get heaved off. Schematic. As I say, 1 million servers. It's wonderful. So this thing runs on about 6,000 servers overnight. The auction logs are, I don't know where, because the auction logs I think are stored in Oklahoma or something, but I mean this thing runs, God knows, 6,000 servers, runs for about 2 or 3 hours. It does a lot, most of it is the intensive simulation, the markup chain Monte Carlo for fitting the time series model. The actual Bayesian belief network takes a minute per campaign. Dumped into a NoSQL, if you've come across Google's big table, it goes into a big table output. Consolidated, served up in the front end. The front end, very, very lightweight, a bunch of JavaScript and various other stuff. So that's a pipeline. Front end, we've gone over all of that. if you're interested, I don't know about, I'd be happy to post the slides, or if you want to get in contact, I can tell you much more about what actually goes on in the units here. Yes, of course, yes. So if you come across market chain molecular, a Gibbs sampler runs on a Kalman filter. It actually works. This stuff actually works in application, which is quite something when you spend 10 years looking at it in journals. It's not very big. You can get a lot of it off the shelf with R. For kicks, you can re-implement some of it in C++ if you run out of how to do this. But essentially, it's fairly easy to use. Provided you have the 6,000 servers, it works overnight. Variable elimination. The Bayesian network stuff is easy. I recommend this to anyone. As long as you can get the Bayesian network, and you have to sit down, and that's the frustrating bit. I sit down with people who don't necessarily agree. Once you get the technical stuff for a Bayesian network is very, very simple to do. I did the most brain-dead algorithm you can imagine for doing it. It's called variable elimination. And it works. It works so fast, it's not worth using a more complicated one. R and C++. Nice thing is, a lot of this is off-the-shelf packages. There's a bunch of hacking you have to do on top of that. You actually have to write your model and do the Gibbs sampling and so on. But it's a lot of, I'm very old, and when I started this 20 years ago, this was hard work, this was hard stuff. And kids nowadays do not appreciate it, just how hard it is. This is a lot easier, it's really, really good. So it says 3,000, I worked with 6,000 I think there. And it runs pretty quick. It's done on the data. We can run it faster than they can update the data. Let's put it that way. So we're not limiting the output by our compute time. One of the interesting things is once you get to 6,000 machines, it's like trying to tie 6,000 puppies to your car to get it towed. It's really interesting because many of them will be going in the right direction, but when you've got 6,000 machines, some of them are off peeing in a corner, and all sorts of cute things go on. It's fascinating trying to run these things, because you're going to get a disk breakage, for example. We don't use a lot of the MapReduce infrastructure, and I'll come to your question, don't worry. A lot of the MapReduce infrastructure that gets around all this, and so you spend a lot of time, nursemaiding machines, which is an interesting exercise, but it can be done. Sorry, go ahead.
The processing is taking place on a customer-by-customer basis, or is it basically all the accounts running simultaneously across?
So yeah, it's sharded. There's about 5. We shard it by about 5 campaigns to a shard. So it pulls them, and where are they coming from? They're coming from a bunch of sharded files.
So for any given customer's campaign, how often is that analysis run?
So it can run every day, but they don't update the data.
What's the utility of running it that frequently? I'm wondering if for the account managers to see that.
Well, exactly. So we don't necessarily run it every day, but it can be done. It can be done every day. So yeah, as I say, it's not an issue. Essentially, we can run it fast enough to be useful to the account managers. So the front end, is very, very straightforward. So again, you can't see this terribly well on there, but there's your front end. You can tell which, this is very much in trial stage, so this is what we'll see in the trial stage. You can tell which campaigns are selected. It tells you, this is the inferences that were drawn, these are the interior nodes. This goes to a select number of account managers who are used to this sort of thing, so they're not shocked by all of this. You can then give them the output, you visualize the output of the time series analysis and so on and so forth, and that gives them enough to go on. So, without further ado, the next case study, and I have what, 5 minutes? 10. Oh, God, luxury, right? Is anomaly detection. So very, very different. So here in search world, you've got 4 billion to 6 billion queries a day coming into search. What they'll do is then carve those queries into categories based, for example, on the language of the query, the country of origin, what sort of browser they were using, what particular features they have turned on. All of these streams are then counted. You count how many queries occur within a particular stream. What the charge of this particular piece of software is to look for abrupt changes, so look for point anomalies in these streams. we also did something for trend anomalies, but I'll come to that later on. When you get a blip, it may mean that there's a holiday. What we found, for example, was that every time there's a holiday in Europe, the Italians take a day off, which I thought was really cute. You can see this happening. But there's holidays, but it may be a change in user behavior we have to agree with, and that essentially you've got an ascending level of urgency there. That at the end, if you've got a service breakage, you better know about it pretty quickly. So part of the group that I was with actually spends most of the time looking at these anomalies. So the challenge, this has to be done on a fairly regular basis, so at least a day. A day is probably about as slow as you can the least granular updates you can want. But essentially, you've got about 250,000 series, about 500 points in each. You've got to run across these things, and then it's all very well to identify anomalies, but then you've got to explain what's going on. And in that case, there really needs to be some human interaction with this stuff. So for example, last week there was a bunch of anomalies associated with the European election. It's very difficult to build an automated system that knows about elections as well as everything else. One that we found was, the Duchess of York had a picture that appeared on the Chicago Tribune's website, which was being linked to from Fox News, a Murdoch newspaper in Australia, which sounds weird, but essentially you got a huge number of clicks coming through, and there was this big blip in Australia. It takes you forever to work out what the hell's going on, yeah. And essentially it's this strange things are happening. There has to be human intervention. A lot of these are sui generis sort of occurrences. It's not easy or even practical in many cases to identify them automatically. There's a lot that you can do, but at some level you have to present these anomalies to a human being who actually casts their eye over this stuff. Here's an example of anomalies. There's a logging problem, and that dropped off. That one is Hurricane Sandy. So 2 anomalies. That one you have to act on, because that's a problem. Hurricane Sandy, even Google can do very little about Hurricane Sandy, so that can be cheerfully discounted. That's the sort of thing that humans have to look at. So our solution, we did semi-automated monitoring. We spot the anomalies automatically. We churn out some large number of anomalies. The anomalies are then clustered. They're clustered in hopefully meaningful ways. These clusters are then passed to human analysts who will look at the clusters and say, well, everything in this cluster is characterized by this sort of thing. And they can dispatch the anomaly or report it or whatever. For detection, what essentially doing in a time series anomaly analysis is that you're looking at each point and saying, this is a long way from where I would have expected it to be based on the other points in the time series. So you're looking essentially at points, a bit like the value at risk. You're looking at tail probabilities. You're saying, this is what we expect given our model, this is where it occurred. It's way off in the tail, that's probably an anomaly. For the post-processing and visualization, we essentially use agglomerative clustering. It's a very peculiar form of agglomerative clustering, but that's essentially what it's trying to match time series with similar patterns of anomalies in them. Another time series model. This one's much simpler than the ones we've used in the first case study. It's a still structural model, but it has to run every night. It has to run over 250,000 time series. It's pretty quick to use. So that's essentially what you're looking for, is things off in the tail of this sort of smudge there is the predicted probability or the smooth probability. You're looking for things in the tail of the distribution. What we then do is we take these 250,000 series and we try and stack them into groups that have similar occurrences of anomalies, where similar is it occurred on the same day, it was above or below in the same fashion. Those are you get a feature vector for each time series. You do the standard, this is based on the Jacob distance, you do a standard sort of similarity measure.
Excuse me, your x-axis there with that days, hours?
That's days, yeah. The clustering, there is a paper actually on this. I think it's on the Google research. Anybody wants to look at it in greater detail, you're welcome to email me. It's a funny sort of agglomerative clustering. It stacks these things by essentially collapsing particular attributes, essentially eliminating attributes, and seeing if we can pack these things into clusters. Same sort of setup. there's the output. The output is essentially a dendrogram or a cladogram attached to a spreadsheet. You can pick and actually expand this tree, which is attached to a spreadsheet. And across the spreadsheet are descriptions of particular types of series with anomalies in them. And you can click through and see what the system's complaining about. Take a look at that. I'm actually going back to this, and we're working on some more enhancements to this that will provide some more suggestions as to what the anomalies may be. It may even discount some of them based on automatically derived information. But at the moment, that's what's running for the analysts. They're essentially going through, looking at these clusters, looking at what characterizes them, and then investigating based on that. Lessons. I often give this pitch to MBA students and statistical students. And what I tell them is, this is actually an HBR, Harvard Business Review. I'm not making this, a Harvard Business Review article. And some of that's true, but most of it isn't. So one of the things that you'll find, I probably don't need to, you can commiserate with me. I'm sure I'm not imparting any information here. Most of the stuff is actually, and most of the hard work is you go to a group and say, I'm here to help you with your problem. Problem? We have no problem. I was actually told you never solve the customer's problem. The customer solves a problem while you happen to be there. And everybody's happy. That's the sort of thing. You can spend a lot of time trying to work out what the problem actually is. Acquiring the data, formatting the data, getting the access permissions, all sorts of different things. As I say, trying to manage 6,000 machines that run every night is actually possible. It's remarkable it's possible, but it's not necessarily without its issues. And then you've got to explain what happened. You cannot go to them and say, we have a nice switching heteroscedasticity structural time series model which gives this and that, but it does not work. You have nice graphs, you have simple words or something. You have to work very hard at presenting this. If it's not credible, if it's not understandable, all your work sadly is for naught. However, the nice thing, and as I say, given the perspective of age, it's remarkable what's happened. We do have a lot of data, as you well know. A lot of this stuff is now possible, where it wasn't possible before. And what was hard before is now easy. So there's a continuous stream of improvements. A lot of free off-the-shelf software. A lot of the techniques are developing as well. People are actually taking techniques and applying them to real situations, and then you often need to change the techniques, but a lot of them are more practically applicable. And lastly, but not least, as I say, if you've got a million servers, I had a friend whose grandmother was a computer. At the time, all computers used to wear dresses, and they were actually ladies. This is about the time of the Second World War. That was a computer in about 1940. In fact, when Ron Fisher, one of the giants of statistics, was working, that was that's basically what I could say. You can imagine inverting a 12 by 12 matrix was an afternoon's work for 12, 13 people. Nowadays, it's you can run it on your cell phone. Very, very simple. So it's without comparison. The potentiality afforded by this stuff is really quite intoxicating. So there we go. I think. Hey, there we go.
Thank you so much, Phil. Oh my gosh. I'm in marketing. I know that some of that might have scared some of you, but it's really not as scary as it sounds. Thank you so much, Phil. Wow, that was an amazing presentation. And thank you for all your great analogies, too. So next up, we have Bob Boyd, who will be taking over management of this group. He has his own consulting firm with the whole team, Haddon Group. He has over 25 years experience in data warehousing and high velocity messaging, so he brings quite a bit of experience to the group and a team to help out. So without further ado, I would like to hand over not just the floor, but the whole group. You're in good hands to a warm welcome for Bob Boyd.
Give me just a second and I'll swap the computer out. Geez, I gotta follow a guy who's a mathematician from Cambridge with a British accent and a million computers, and he just said heteroskedasticity.
Twice.
That's twice, yeah. That's a hard act to follow. All right. Well, so first a couple of more like housekeeping issues. So the next meeting would be July the 3rd on the Thursday. All in favor of postponing until August. I don't know how many people would be able to make it, but you know, what do you think? Shall we postpone July 3rd? We hadn't made any plans for it, and I don't have speakers, so we kind of planned on pushing it, but if you're totally keen on needing someplace to go on a Thursday night, what do you think?
And my people here.
Vacation.
Postpone. Vacation. All right.
A is fireworks.
A is fireworks, and I'm sure there will be a World Cup match on it that we can't afford to miss, right? Yeah. All right. So we'll push till August. All right. So that's it for housekeeping. I don't think there's anything else. I'm already signed up as one of the organizers on the meetup. If you'd like, I can give you a card afterwards. So, did you want to do were you going to do another raffle now or at the end?
I'll do that at the end.
At the end.
Okay. You're right. I was going to do one in between. I forgot.
All right. So moving along with the presentation. So, you know, I've learned a lot sitting in on these presentations. And the last one was the most densely packed one I've been through so far. So that's amazing. I've mostly learned about the use of the OpenStack software, the things that we often hear presentations about, you know, NoSQL, MongoDB, Hive, Twitter Storm was one. That was a good one. And I learned a lot because I don't use that stuff very often. So I thought, well, you know, there's probably something I have done or I'm doing now or have done recently that maybe you guys haven't heard about very much or at all. So this is the most kind of exotic thing that I could think of that I'd worked on. So I'll start with a couple of use cases and then a bit of technology, which is kind of the unusual thing, and then talk about how that technology was applied in those use cases. So the use cases. The first use case is card fraud. You know, about 15 years ago, Visa was watching card transactions, and if you used your card, if somebody used your card to buy gasoline 3 times in 2 hours, they knew that was a problem, or they were pretty sure that was a problem, because probably you're not going to be filling up your gas tank 3 times in an hour. Actually got a leak. But it was a very common fraud profile. So as soon as a card number went into the wild, one of the first things people did was it got spread around, and everybody who got that number then went out and filled up their car with gas. So, and every canister and container they could get a hold of, right? So they knew if they saw that, they should reject the third transaction. But what's interesting about that is then you really only need, you know, if you're a card holder bank, if you're that guy in the red all the way there at the left, if you're that person, if you're this company, and you see those 3 transactions, you can stop that transaction, you can reject that transaction. But really you only need to know the last hour's worth of transactions, and that's not very many. So now let's have a slightly different use case. Here's a card. It's been issued in California, and it's being used to buy $558 worth of jewelry from a merchant, a jeweler in Nigeria. Maybe you want to stop that one. Or maybe this card is issued in London, UK, and it's being used to buy 12 tickets on Vietnam Airways. That's also one. Probably will get something. It might get a reject. About 10 years ago, over 40% of all airline tickets on certain airlines, usually in the Far East, were fraudulently purchased. So the guy you were sitting next to was riding on somebody. It was the identity theft caravan. So that's fine, except that when I stopped that transaction for the Nigerian jewelry purchase, that could be actually a legitimate purchase. Now, that's not something that's going to happen 3 times in an hour. It might happen 3 times in a year. It might happen every year on somebody's birthday or thereabouts. So what do we need? We need a lot of transactions history. And we need that on everybody. So imagine you were a card issuing bank and you had a portfolio of, say, 25 million cards. Now I need a year's, for the sake of argument, a year's worth. A year's not really enough. 18 months is better because then you get annual patterns. 24 months is even better if you've got it. When we did this was several years ago, so at the time 3 years worth of data wasn't even a kind of a viable thing, but we had it lying around in the same format, partly because the Visa level 1 data had changed. But at any rate, now I've got 25 million cards. I've got a year's worth of data, let's say 2 years worth of data. People use their cards on average almost once a day. So that's, let's say for easy math, 400 times a year. So I've got 25 million cards. Let's boost it up by 1,000. I've got 25 billion transactions. Each one is 1,000. I've got 25 terabytes of data. Is that enough? I'm going to, well, let's leave it at that. So let's say I've got 25 terabytes worth of data. So, what did I say down here? 32? That's pretty good. Actually, the total number, we ended up with about 50, was about the right number. And a credit card transaction can only take a second and a half from the time you press the button to the time that you get it, it's responded to. Now this is at a point of sale, at a card present transaction. It's not a I'm sitting at my computer transaction, because those can go into any number of bit buckets and wait for batch processing through the card scheme, whatever the card is. But in general, this system won't work if it's going to slow down that second and a half response time. So you've got some very tiny little budget. So the solutions, well, there's the usual, let me have a great big relational table. Maybe I'll denormalize it, maybe I won't. I might do things to reduce the row width. I might, it's just pan. If you see pan up here, that means primary account number. So if you see pan up here, if I got 25 million primary accounts, and that's a table, and I've got, 25 billion transactions, and that's a table. Now you've got at least one join. I'd probably end up with another join for merchant information, and then I'm going to have another join for the merchant bank. And the transactions are pretty long. There's keys, PKI signatures. You want the certificate. You want to know if their certificates were correct all the way. So they can be pretty big. Anyway, with that many rows at the time we were working on this was just not possible with a relational database of any kind. And it wasn't possible with a file system either, like the file system that underlies Haddon or something like that. There wasn't a useful distributed file system to handle all this stuff. I suppose today you might take a run at it with a totally in-memory database. At the time we didn't have that. Now here's the second use case, and I'll just tell you now it'll be a star schema kind of a thing, but let's skip to the solution for our card fraud problem. I'll come back to this in a minute. Okay, so let me tell you about the little bit of technology. So 10 years ago, there was a company called Metisa. If you were an Italian, it would be Netezza, right? And there were several competitors that came up at about that time that were in the parallel processing world. There's Greenplum, which is now Pivotal. PyRXL is now Amazon Redshift and Action. So that's what you're using when you use Redshift, right? Vertica 1010 data is really cool. Almost nobody knows about it because it's a little captive of the Wall Street world. I'll tell you a little bit more about Netezza, but what it's not a columnar database, it's not a document or a graph data set, it's none of the cool new stuff, you know, on that you can get on an Amazon platform. It's certainly not open source, it's actually a bit of proprietary hardware. It's really rows and tables centric. It's got a distributed file system. It's optimized on proprietary hardware and a refrigerator. You've got 6,000 computers. I've got one.
One big one.
Yeah. And I don't have anybody worried. You know, they don't occasionally go bad. It's just the whole thing is bad, or the whole thing is nice. Okay, so in this particular case, what did we do? So you do data. You distribute the data. I took out a lot of very nicely descriptive slides because they had a certain brand name printed all over them, which I didn't want to show too much of. But maybe I'll figure a way around that. So you take these billions of transactional rows, and you can flatten them out. You can denormalize them. And then you can distribute them across what are called snippets or data slices. And you can have, I have a mere 24, but you could have 240 or 1,000. And you use hardware to accelerate it. Now everybody thinks, well, you got to have indices so that I can go to the data that I want, but try the inverse. Have a zone map that says, this is, you know, if you were looking for a primary account number, we all know what those look like. They're 16 digits, they're printed on front of your card. If I had the lowest value and the highest value of that field in a map for every 3 meg page, I could I could keep those kind of narrow, and then I would know where not to look. Not where to look, but where not to look. For the particular transactions for Bob's, you know, that I want about Bob, right? I've got Bob's trying to make this Nigerian jewelry purchase, and I'm asking the question, I would stop this unless I see that he's done this 2 or 3 times in the last couple of years and not charged it back. So I'm going to look for all 596 of Bob's transactions over the last 2 years. And he's got this pan. Now where should I look? Not there, not there, not there, not there. Okay, here, maybe here, maybe here, maybe here. So that's how a table scan works in this particular refrigerator-sized computer. So here's a little bit about how. So I was talking about data slices. So imagine you've got, you know, your data slices here. Only I know you've got data slices because you've got 6,000 machines, but the box that I'm, you know, this is one box and it's about this big. So I've got 24 data slices, but you could put 400 and some number in each one, and we can lash these together, and I could in a sales call swear you could search a petabyte worth of data. Nobody has a petabyte worth of data, but you know, that's the theory anyway. So we slice the data. In our particular case, we're going to randomly assign these transactions across all these disk enclosures. I don't care what data is in the transaction. I'm just going to pick one and put it there, right? And then when I want to search, I'm not really just searching with a CPU. It's not strictly a CPU. What I've got is for every data slice, which is some number of disk enclosures, I've got this little factory, which is a combination of CPUs and field programmable gate arrays. And the Unix, the Linux host here, takes in my query and says, how do I go find all of this in this refrigerator as fast as possible? How do I break this query up and send the right amounts, the query, the right amount of the query to each location for each slice that where the answer might reside, or where some data might be. So this is, what do you use field programmable gate arrays for? You can use them for compression and decompression after you've done the data read. You can project the rows. You can restrict the, project the columns, restrict the rows. So by the time you've gotten it to the sort of the head of the line here, before you go off to the host, you've really squeezed down the data that's passing over the little network inside the box to the host. Here's a picture of what it looks like when you plugged all the bits and pieces into the framework, and that thing's about 6'2". So what are we trying to do here? So we've got these data slices. We've got one table, which is our transaction history. We've got a merchant table. We've got this is the primary account number table, and we probably have taken this transaction set of transaction history, and we've randomly assigned each row to a data slice. Or in this example, I'm imagining we flattened it out, because that's kind of cool too. But either one works. And there's just a couple of little statements in here that are interesting. One is the distribute on, and so I'm going, in this particular case, I'm going to distribute on random, just randomly assign it. But I'm going to organize, that is, I'm going to create my zone map on primary account number and purchase date, because it turned out that once we were able to search all this data for particular primary account numbers, the next thing was, well, could you get it for us in, sort of this big, or this much time, or this much time, or can you join a few more merchant fields, and a join, well, I've got 50 milliseconds, so I'll have to think about that. One of the things you want, I keep talking about assigning them randomly. Usually they're not assigned randomly, but in this particular case it was a good idea, because what we want is the same number of rows in every data slice. So I've distributed the workload as evenly as I can. There's, imagine the inverse. So imagine I've said, oh, I tell you what, let's distribute it on primary account number. So now I've, whether it's hashed or not, but I've distributed the work, I've distributed the transaction rows on primary account number. Well, what is that going to mean? That's probably going to mean that exactly one of these disks contains all of the data, and the read operation is the most takes the most time. So we want to the extent possible, eliminate as many pages to read on every data slice as possible. Read one, here and there and here and there and here and there and here and there, and then send the aggregate that data. Things to definitely not distribute on are things like date, because you get seasonality, and then when you hash that number, you get, this is Christmas and it's that long. Zip code, which doesn't really have enough enough data. Also, it's strangely, although zip codes aren't that overloaded with people, they are completely overloaded with purchases. So people who live in cities use their card a whole lot more often than people who live out of the country. So that would be data skew, and then there's query skew. We'll get back to that. That's so what's interesting here are these two, distribute on random and then organize on account number and purchase date. And how do you take two filter factors like primary account number and date, or even three, merchant type would be another one, and make a zone map out of it where the ranges are as narrow as possible. And so I didn't bring the math, but there's something called the Hilbert curve multi-dimensional map that takes, one or two or three or many. I think we're limited to 4, and maps those combinations onto some algorithm that then allows you to place the data on specific pages on any disk. So now I've got, I have, in Netezza speak, groomed the table. The table now, it may start at 25 terabytes, but once I've groomed it and created these zone maps on cluster-based tables, I may have, expanded the allocated extents by twice or even more. So I've sort of spread the data out thinly and across all the data slices. So that's the quickest gallop through what this particular little data machine does. In this case, where we've got a reasonably large data set, not very many relations. One primary one. If it's denormalized, we could just stick with one, or maybe 3 or 4, and then return data in in a couple dozen, 4 dozen milliseconds. Okay, galloping right along. Here's a star schema. Typical problem, you've got a lot of source systems, you do extract, transform, load, and then down here you've got star schemas, data warehouse star schemas, which at their heart have some denormalized fact table. And then a lot of dimensional tables around the outside, and you've probably spun off several reporting data marts. Now, before I go any further with this, I probably should say that, so Haddon Hill's customers are financial institutions, healthcare, retail, the usual corporate suspects, not Google and Yahoo and Facebook and YouTube. So when we show up, there is nobody there who has a snowball's chance of managing 6,000 servers. There's not the infrastructure, there's no more capacity, even if they know how to do it. So it's interesting to them, the idea that we could wheel in one machine, plug it in, and then connect it to some network where we can get the data onto it and do some interesting things. I suspect that if I were giving away these boxes to you guys tonight out of the trunk of my car, most of you work at places where you don't even have a plug to plug them in, right? So there's no one to, because you use Redshift on Amazon, or you rent space on Rackspace, or so this is only applicable in a few, I think, a relatively small number of situations, many of which are in what we used to call flyover country. Not here or on the East Coast, mostly sort of in the middle of the country. So, what good is this particular kind of a box for a star schema? Well, I'll tell you the sort of the simple answer is that usually whatever platform the company is using for ETL is so egregiously underpowered that if I plug my laptop in with them, I double their available capacity. So it's usually a pretty problematic little part of the forgotten part of their computing infrastructure, the ETL part. What we do find is that as soon as you have a reasonably large amount of computing power that this particular appliance brings, the ETL jobs go from 5 or 10 hours to less than 5 or 10 seconds just on the hardware speed up alone. Now, why do you need a petabyte of data? Well, nobody has a petabyte of data until you've taken in 100 gigabytes of data and transformed it 5 times, and now you have 500 gigabytes or 500 terabytes of data, and you do the transform so that you can append master data to the row, so that now everybody has the same primary account number. Or you can change all the data formats, so now all the data formats are integer seconds starting at the same date. You want to make sure you've set time zones correctly on all the rows, etc. So there are always just how many little turns of the crank do you go through to get the data consistent across all of your sources, and so that's how you end up with 500 terabytes of data. So what I usually do a little demo on is this star schema, which is right out of the TPC-H star schema benchmark. It's very simple. It's got the little denormalized fact table in the middle, and which is orders and line numbers on orders. And if you read the paper, they'll tell you why it's okay to have gotten rid of the part table, and why it's okay to have gotten rid of the part list that had prices on it, the time granularity didn't match, etc. So what are you doing when you have a star schema? Well, you're doing joins, right? You're doing a lot of aggregation, and you're doing joins. So how do you do a join in a machine that has no indices? So the way you hope you can do a join is you take one of your tables, let's say it's the biggest table, it's your line items table, and you distribute it across all of your data slices. Randomly? Oh no. You distribute it on order key for the sake of argument, because I know that when I do most of my aggregations, one of the things I'm going to join it to most often, I gotta start up my connection again. But while I'm at it, before I've lost the connection, but this is all I was going to show you anyway. This is the operations panel for this machine that's running in a so-called data center over here in Oakland. And it just, it simply shows you our little petite Netiza. These are all the various alarms on the front and rear view. And then we've got what's called snippet processing array unit, and it has 4 snippet processing units. And if I could click on this data slices, it'd show you that it has 24 data slices, but 2 are in reserve in case 1 or 2 of the other 22 that are usable, start giving off blue smoke. So.
This is still in use?
Yeah, it's an antique, isn't it? Yeah, it's about 10 years old. So, what would you do? You would distribute the line item table on order key. You would also distribute orders on order key, and then when you were going to retrieve a line item that had the foreign key here for order key, the order table information would be right next to it. It would at least be on the same data slice. If we're lucky, it'll be not on the same page, but on a page that is sort of near enough on the actual disk that you can move the disk once and read both of them. So that's called co-location. This is rather than an index. Now suppose you had in your dimension table a small table. For example, vendor's not a good example, date's a good example. You're only going to have like 25 or 3,000 dates. If you had 10 years of data, you'd have 3,600. And you don't want to try to, how are you going to put that on every one of these different data slices? Well, you're not. You're going to take the whole table and you're going to write it, not just theoretically it writes it to every data slice, but that's not actually what it does. It places the whole table sort of strategically on disks so that you have very little movement between reading anything else on the disk and grabbing the whole data table. So that's broadcast, where you write this data many times, you write it once everywhere. And the optimizer takes care of it. What happens when I haven't co-located the data or broadcast the data? Then you have to rewrite the data from, I've got some line items here on data slice 1 for a customer that was whose data was distributed here to data slice 4. I actually have to write that customer data up to data slice 1 and then do the join and then bring it off. Don't worry, you don't have to write that yourself. It'll do it for you. Sometimes you get single table redistribution, and sometimes you get multi-table redistribution. But you'll, well, the good news is you get a little query optimizer, which will tell you, I'll see how fast I can start it up again. Before I get to that, because it's going to take a minute to restart the connection, one of the interesting things you can do is use a materialized view. The materialized view is then can have new distribute on and organize on clauses, and then you've actually rewritten the data in different data slices. So it's now co-located with the data that it wants to join with, and it's organized on the filter factors that you're going to use in your query. And the big lesson learned is the hardware just makes it so fast that we can pretty much get rid of the T in ETL, just extract it, load it, do transformations after we've loaded it on the Netezza. So that's it for the canned presentation. And here's my dead, maybe I can just move this out of the way though. So I did one of these query plans before the connection was dropped. I can't scroll up. This is it, right? So along with that star schema, the TPC star schema, standard schema, come a lot of standard queries. And the queries are interesting. They start off with pretty easy things that this machine can do in a few milliseconds. But this is the most interesting one. This one, I wish I could show you in more detail, but this one would, the optimizer's best guess is about 16,000 seconds. So even with a tiny little database of, I've only got, I think, 50 gigabytes loaded in there, you can still do enough multiple joins without taking advantage of the co-location, materialized views, and the broadcast and relocation, that you can drive up the response rate. I was going to do this one just as an example of how not to write a query. The rest of them are so short. Anyway, that's probably all you wanted to know about Netezza plus some.
Any questions with Q&A?
Sure.
How much does it cost? The box.
The box.
I mean, it looks like it was bought by IBM.
Yeah, it was purchased by IBM about 4 years ago. So now it's an IBM product.
I guess at the time when you did it, I mean, you don't sell it anymore.
Yeah, Netezza doesn't exist as a standalone company anymore. Yeah, neither does Green Plum or any of those others. There was this, there was this big event around the early parts of 2000s that made a whole lot of people think there was money in mining very large data sets of not very well constrained data. So a bunch of companies started up, and a couple of years after those events, suddenly there were a bunch of database companies ripe to be purchased by the usual cast of characters, IBM and CA, etc.
But how much was it at the time? Or how much is the 6 foot?
Oh, the 6 foot thing?
Sold in segments?
Well, personally, I got mine for a bargain rate. I did buy one myself. Yeah, it's my own personal computer, and it's in my own personal data center with a lot of with an air conditioning unit that looks like a Dalek from a Doctor Who episode.
I'm sure Bob will be happy to hook you up with the sales.
They could be $1 million, around about $1 million. But I sure didn't
I was going to
pay.
say 100,000.
No, I knocked off more zeros than that.
Oh wow!
I bought a refurb. Yes.
How easy is it to get the data out of there if you wanted to talk about, the data warehouse to API or something like that?
Oh yeah. Okay, so my favorite thing is something I saw just at that the data conference where I went. IE Innovation. So there's a product called Looker, which seems just lickety split at you write a little SQL. Now what I liked about Tableau is, okay, you write a little SQL and you get the data back pretty quickly, but you couldn't drill down. Now you're working on a spreadsheet, it's very separate. Suddenly you've got this massive truck and you've now loaded a wee few droppers onto the back of a mouse, and he's trotting along with a little bit of data. But Looker leaves all the data on Netezza, And I can drill down because Looker takes my original SQL query and then says, oh, and what are they going to want to drill down on? And creates a query plan for everything you might want to drill down on that was in that original query. And I say, hey, I want to see more of this, and bang, it's right there. I mean, it comes back in. I couldn't believe it. I thought they were lying to me. But really, I said, hey, you know, it's a nice little UI, and it goes in and out really quickly. It's not one of those data warehouses where, you know, the data checks in, but it don't check out. It comes out very quickly. Yes?
What was interesting was the same problem that you face in terms of sharding across your 6-foot box actually occur in a data center. So
sure.
We have a lot of the BigQuery engines that are facing the same issues with joins and are having to do partitions, you know, based on certain fields.
Right.
So a lot of that same technology is cropping up now at bigger scale. It's 10 times slower, but it's very much, very isomorphic. It's the same sort of issues that you're dealing with, and the same solutions that are coming along.
Oh, sure.
I should imagine there's a lot of reinvention of the wheels going on.
Indeed,
yeah.
Indeed.
It's a proud tradition of that.
I'm shocked to find that someone has solved a 25-year-old problem.
Exactly.
Yeah. Anything else?
Oh, thank you very much.
Okay, wow. What a great evening of speakers. Got a tough act to follow there, Bob, for August. Okay, I'm going to do the drawing on, we'll first do the GigaOM Structure Conference. They've done a full pass that they've donated. And again, you know, if you can't make it and you know that right now, say something now. If not, just use the website and the forum to say, hey, looking for a taker. So let's see, Jonathan, are you new? We got a lot of new people tonight. Yeah, welcome. Okay, it is Naveen Shetty. Naveen? Oh, congratulations. This will be, I'll send you an email, which I need your email address, so stick around for a couple minutes and get that from you. And then last but not least is the Internet of Things World that is in San Francisco. This again is a full pass. So let's see, how about Parimal? Parimal? Is that how you say that? Okay, Parimal, let's see who you drew. Ooh, Wells Fargo. Sunil Ramchadani. Is Sunil here? Sunil Ramchadani. Sorry. No Sunil? Oh, there you are. Congratulations, Sunil. Thank you so much. I can read your email address. All right, well, thanks again, and we have this space till 9 o'clock, so feel free to mingle, network, and there's some cookies, and thank you again.